People come to hear Tanya. I almost wish like we had it every week instead of every other week. This way it would be more consistent. So just to remind you, we are covering Perek Lamed Zayin Lamed Ches. We're talking about chapter 37, 38. And we've been experiencing basically a progression. We've been building up to this moment. And we're going to be shifting into a different way or a different concept than what we've been talking about up until now, but we're finishing up this concept and then we're going to move on to the next. So what have we been talking about up until now? We've basically been discussing like what's the point of creation? What's the point of creation? What is creation here for? What does Hashem want from creation? What do we want from creation? And we had all the different perspectives, and we spoke about what we want out of creation. What we want is self-refinement. We want to grow as people. We want to be a better person. What does Hashem want from creation? He wants to be revealed. He wants the refinement of the world. And that's why last time we got together, we were speaking a lot about action, physical action, la'asai, to reference, throw back to the original phrase on which the entire Tanya is based. The concept is to do it. That is the purpose. And we gave the analogy last week of if we want to lift a house, right? If you want to lift something super heavy, where do you lift it from? You don't lift it from the top. You ever like watch a kid like lift something from the top and like the whole thing crashes down? They're not realizing that if you need to lift something, you need to lift it from the bottom, from its foundation, and bring it up. That way, everything lifts at the same time. And action, as we discussed last week, is what does that. When you lift from the foundation, when you focus on action, because you're involved in the physical world and you're taking the physical world and you're revealing the godliness within it, that's what Hashem deeply wants. That's the whole purpose of creation from God's perspective, right? And our perspective is a little bit more, we have a lot of other agendas, but Hashem's perspective is clear and unbroken. This is what he wants. He wants to be revealed in this world, and that's what that la'asai is, for us to take action and to do it, follow through. So two interesting stories that the Rebbe brings to juxtapose what the Alter Rebbe is talking about in Perek Lamed Ches. And the Rebbe brings these two stories, which you probably are familiar with, and I'm also going to share with you a bunch of stories, because I love stories, and I also think it will help us shift gears the way the Alter Rebbe is going to shift gears now in this Perek. What's the first story? Famous story of Chayni Hamagel. So if anyone doesn't know the story, Chayni Hamagel was a tzaddik, and he was approached by the people of his time period. There was a terrible hunger in the land because there wasn't any rain for a long time. And so because there was no rain, the land became barren and people were actually starving. And the people approached Choni Hamagel and they said, we need your help. We desperately need your help. And so Choni famously draws a circle in the earth. He steps into that circle and he tells Hashem, I'm not going to step out of this circle until you provide rain. And he begins to daven. And he just davens and davens and davens. And at first there's just a little trickle of rain. And he continues to daven and he says, this is not what I'm davening for. I'm davening for rain. And so then there's like a deluge where it's just pouring, almost flooding. Which makes sense. If there hasn't been rain for a long time, it floods. And Choni continues to daven. And finally, Hashem provides rain where it's just right. You know, kind of like the story where like the porridge was too, what's the story of, what's her name? Goldilocks? The porridge was too hot and then it was too cold and then it was just right. So Choni davened and davened and davened. First it was too little and then it was too much and then it was just right. And this was the famous miracle that Choni Hamagel was meritorious to be a channel for the people of his time period. Okay, that's one story. Now let's juxtapose that to another story about Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, the author of the Zohar, had, interestingly enough, a very similar story where the people of his time were experiencing drought and needed rain, and he knew this. And so when he sees a whole bunch of people approaching him, before they even have a chance to explain why they're all coming to approach him, while they're coming to, what they're going to ask him of, he just starts sharing with them Torah. And he gives them a whole pilpul, a whole Torah class right there. Imagine like he's standing on his porch and they come up the stairs. They're about to ask him this big bakasha, beseech him to pray to the Lord that he should bring rain upon the land. And before anything, he starts teaching them Torah. And as he's teaching them this Torah class, it begins to rain. Just a beautiful, gentle rain, exactly what they needed. And I'm going to leave you with these stories. We'll get to it at the end, but it's an interesting juxtaposition between tefillah and Torah, right? In one story, Choni Amago davens, and he continues to daven until it's just right. And in the other story, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai just shares a pilpul, he shares some Torah, and immediately there's the perfect amount of rain for what the people at the time needed and what the land actually needed. So let's leave that for a moment and let's start talking about Torah. Let's look at different sages throughout our history who have sacrificed tremendously for Torah. First person that comes to mind is Hillel. Who was Hillel, right? Hillel, who was friends slash the one who always argued with Shammai. What was Hillel's story? Hillel was extremely poor. All he had was a very few amount of coins, and those coins he split in half, whatever he could, half of literally buy necessities for the family, and the other half he gave to the kollel so that he could enter into the Beis Medrash and learn, which is an interesting concept because Torah is supposed to be free. It's not supposed to be something that you're charged for, but this kollel, this Beis Medrash, you had to pay in order to get in. And one day he just didn't make enough and he wasn't able to afford it, but his yearning and his desire for Torah study was so strong that he had to figure out a way to get in there, but there wasn't a way. They literally had what are those people called? Bouncers. They literally had bouncers at this Beis Medrash who didn't allow you to come in unless you paid. And so Hillel knew that at the top of the Beis Medrash there was a skylight. And so he figured if he climbs to the top of the skylight, he'll be able to hear words of Torah and he'll be able to gain in that way. And the story famously goes that as he's lying up there, just entranced with the words of Torah, it begins to snow. And it snows so much that he's completely covered with the snow. And the people down below in the Beis Medrash realize that there's like this weird shape of a man up in the skylight and it's blocking out all the sun that they needed in order to learn Torah. So they venture up there and they find Hillel. And when they inquire, they hear about his situation and how poor he is. And he's taken under the wing of the Reish Beis Medrash, and he's allowed to come in just like that without needing to pay. And he, of course, continues on to become the great Hillel HaZaken. What's amazing about this story? What's incredible about this story is how unsatiated he was. He couldn't let a day go by without learning Torah. His desire, his yearning for Torah was so strong. It was more important to him than life itself. He was endangering his life, climbing to the roof in the middle of a snowstorm. He wasn't even aware to those things. So what is the story illustrating? The sacrifice that Yidden throughout the ages have made for Torah. There's another story about Eliezer ben Harknus, also a pretty famous story. It's written down by himself. He wrote this in Perek Rabbi Eliezer about his journey into coming into Torah. He was actually born into an extremely wealthy family that owned a lot of land. And his father was more of the person who provided for the Beis Medrash as opposed to the person who was in the Beis Medrash. And his father actually was a little bit negative towards the people who learned Torah. He disparaged them. He would tell his children, we're the people who are, the hustlers, we're the people who actually make money, and they're the, the people who sit by and study Torah. We're the ones who are actually doing the work. What's interesting is that one of his sons, one of his many children, was Elazar. Eliezer ben Harkness, right, the child of Harkness, and he had this deep desire to learn Torah, and he would beg his father and argue with his father, let me go to Yerushalayim, let me learn, and his father was adamantly against it. One day, he's working the fields like all of the sons, all of the brothers would, and something happens with his ox or with his horse. His leg twists, he breaks his leg, and there's a voice that calls out from Shemayim and says, this is a sign. And he takes that sign to mean, you're not cut out for farm work, head to Yerushalayim. He leaves everything behind him. He leaves all of his wealth. He leaves all of his recognition. He shows up in Yerushalayim as a nobody and starts learning Torah. I mean, he was learning before, but really properly learning Torah. And what was interesting about this boy who was born with a silver spoon in his mouth was he had no idea how to make money, take care of himself, and was only involved in learning Torah. So he was slowly but surely starving. And the way that the people in the base medrash noticed that he was starving was that his breath began to stink. Not like stink like, he's not taking care of himself in his mouth. He's just, it's the breath of death, like starvation. And he was taken under the wing again by someone else, a mentor, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, who heard his story, realized who he was, and saw, wow, this person deeply wants to learn Torah, has this unsatiable desire. I want to provide for that. What's interesting is that Harkness, his father, heard about what happened to his son, traveled to Yerushalayim to publicly disown him. This is recorded. And when Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai heard that this famous, wealthy personage is coming, Harkness, so he made a whole feast for him to welcome him to come. And he asked one of his Talmidim to stand up and share some words of Torah and welcome Harkness. And so one of his Talmidim stands up and shares some beautiful divrei Torah. And Harkness is really taken with him. And he says, who's this incredible young man? And just like it's as if it's like a movie, right? It's his son, who he doesn't even recognize because of the holiness and the beauty that overtook him as a person and changed literally the way that he looked. And his father just didn't recognize him. So instead of traveling to Yerushalayim to disown him, he took his entire wealth and gave it to that son, which is an interesting question in of itself. But what is the point? The point is that we are seeing in our history, we're seeing in our ancestry this deep desire to learn Torah, this willingness to give up everything, no matter what, to learn Torah. There's another story about Ben Azai, which is like just an interesting story, but he's not considered a Rav, he's not considered a rabbi for this reason. He actually married Rabbi Akiva's daughter and then immediately divorced her. It's kind of like a famous story. Why does he divorce her? Because he says, I'm married to Torah. That's all I could be connected to. I could only be connected to Torah. Right? Unique to him, not something that the Torah can get behind, right? There's a mitzvah in getting married and living in this world. But there is this concept, right? This person who's just completely devoted to Torah. Why is this important? Because we've been talking about throughout probably the last 3 or 4 classes, how important it is to take action, how important the mitzvah is. And we have this question that we see in our history, and we also know that we say Talmud Torah Keneged Kulan, right? Like learning Torah is more important than anything else. It's, if you put it on a scale, it's equal to everything else. So which one is it? Is it mitzvahs or is it Torah? So up until now, we've spent a bunch of classes talking about the incredible advantage of a mitzvah and how it takes your physical body and it connects to this physical world and it actualizes what Hashem really wants, which is to reveal the light of him, the godliness in the physical world, and strip off the barriers that we actually see, right? The physicality, the materialism, the superficiality, and instead to be able to see the revealed godly light in every single thing, in every detail of our world. That's what a mitzvah does. That's what action does, right? And that's why we were speaking last week about when you learn Torah, you should say the words out loud. Why? Because the action is what matters. The action of speaking those words out loud, using your lips to say words of Torah means that there's an action, means that we're doing what Hashem wants, which is built, like taking the world at its foundations and lifting it up. And here the Alter Rebbe does a complete 360 turn and says, now I want to talk to you about the advantage of Torah learning. We can't just disqualify Torah learning. Now we're going to talk about how tremendous and how incredibly powerful learning Torah can be in your world. And it doesn't mean that that has to take away from a mitzvah. We're just explaining the advantages of both. And the Alter Rebbe thinks it's important to bring it over here. So, okay. One of the basic concepts that we've been speaking about a lot is the difference between unity and division. Unity is godly. Unity is the voice of the Nefesh Elokis, that ability to see how Hashem is within everything. And division is, let's say, the voice of the Nefesh Bahamis, the animal soul that sees disparity, sees dissent, sees difference, sees that things are not exactly the same. So, for example, a person who deeply lives with a complete recognition of God will not get dysregulated when there is traffic. Why would that dysregulate a person who lives from a godly perspective? There's a God in the world. Wherever I am is exactly where I'm supposed to be. Okay, I'm going to be late to something. That's how Hashem wants this all to unfold. There's purpose for me here, right? He's just experiencing a sense of calm all the time and a sense of unity. He's flowing with his entire experience, as opposed to the voice of the Nefesh Bahamis, or the voice of division, which is the voice of the Nefesh Bahamis, which is, no, I have to be here, no, I have to be there, feeling not just the dysregulation, but feeling like you have to be in two places at once, and I have to show up for this person, but I also have to be a good mother, and I also have to be a good wife, and I also have to be a good sister, and I just can't fill all these roles. It's so overwhelming. That's division. Okay? So we've been talking a lot about unity being godliness revealed in your reality, in your perspective, and division being the opposite. So here, the Alter Rebbe wants to talk about where we could make a synthesis between the two, where we could take our division mindset or the division perspective and bring ourselves back to a more unity experience. And the Alter Rebbe is saying here that the way to do that is dipping into learning Torah. And he speaks about how the advantage of Torah over mitzvahs is one of unity, okay? And I'll give it to you like in a tidbit, and then we'll share some stories to make it feel more accurate, feel more real. What is it about Torah? What is it about Torah that is so advantageous, that is so precious, that so many Tanas and people throughout our history? I mean, even think about the Rambam. The Rambam's whole life, he was on the run. And what was he doing on the run? He was literally writing Torah the entire time, for like the 14 years that he was running for his life. At every given moment, he's, the imagery is like he's in the bowels of a ship, and he's like scribbling words of Torah, trying to make sure that he could explain Torah to the masses. What is that like absolute devotion? And you could even see in the Gemara, when you study the Gemara, how intellectual, how almost clinically cold it is, the obsession with just diving into Torah and nothing else. The way some people describe it is, imagine a Torah scholar or a Rav. He's in his cellar and he's like writing down these words of Torah, and upstairs, like the Kazakhs are literally attacking, and who knows what's happening upstairs, but he's still finishing off the last few lines that he could, before his life ends. He's just that devoted till he drops. He's going to be involved in learning Torah. What is that? What has us so motivated, so connected to that? What the Alter Rebbe says here is that you're not just connecting your hand to a mitzvah, like wrapping tefillin. You're not just connecting your legs to walking towards a chesed. You're taking your mind and you're connecting it to Hashem's chachma, which means that you're not just affecting your mind, which affects your perspective, which influences your emotions, which influences your actions. There's a transformative experience when you're learning Torah. It's not just here in the present, here right now, I'm doing a mitzvah, which is so exceptional, right? We've been discussing it for the last three sessions, how exceptional that is. The advantage of Torah is when you're taking the strongest tool that we have, right? Our Chabad, our Chachma Bina Das, our intellectual capacity, and connecting our intellectual capacity to Hashem's intellectual capacity, and delving into his perspective, and seeing what the way he looks at the world, the way he sees us, the way he sees purpose. And when we are connecting our minds to his perspective, to his language, to his reality, what we're doing is we're developing our relationship in an entirely different way. There's one thing to care about your friend, for example, and ask her how her day was. That's one level of relationship. Then there's a whole nother level of like checking in with your friend and saying, I knew you were going to the doctor's office on Thursday at 9 o'clock. How do you feel? I know you were so nervous about that. Whoa. Suddenly you're looking at her experience from her perspective and tapping into that and saying, I feel you, I see you, I know what you're going through. Talmud Torah is that experience. It's not just doing a mitzvah and doing what Hashem wants, or saying, I hear you, I know you wanted me to do this, so I'm following through and I'm doing the right thing. I'm doing your purpose, what you want me to do. Learning Torah is an entirely different level of the relationship. It's checking in with that friend from her perspective. Maybe when you go to the doctor's office, you don't feel anything. Maybe when you go to the doctor's office, you feel good. You enjoy it. You feel taken care of. But when she goes to the office, she feels anxiety. And you know that, and you're dipping into her experience and her perspective and saying, hey, how was that? Are you okay? Torah is like that perspective. Torah is taking your mind and shifting it and bringing Hashem's perspective into your mind and into your heart. And what happens then, and this is like the second level, where we say kiner mitzvah v'Torah or, it illuminates you. It wakes you up. It wakes up your experience. Not just as it give you an entirely different perspective, Hashem's perspective, but your entire experience is lifted with connecting to Torah. I'll give you an example, something I heard from Rabbi Paltiel, and I mean, this shir is based on Rabbi Paltiel, but something I loved was when we refer to learning to Tanakh, we use a specific wording, and that wording is mikra. What does mikra mean? Mikra comes from the word kuf reish aleph, which means to call upon. When we're engaged in learning Tanakh, what we're doing is we're calling upon Hashem's essence, and we're connecting our essence with Hashem's essence. And it's funny to say this, but it's not the same when you're learning Mishnayos and Gemara. If you learn Mishnayos and Gemara and you're not understanding at all what's happening as you're learning it, yes, it's beautiful, but you're not connecting to Hashem's essence in the same way as you would when you're reading Tehillim and have no idea what you're saying. Because there's something that happens when you're learning Hashem's Chachma, where you're calling upon his essence. You're lifting your entire experience. Your entire being becomes different. You're connecting in a spiritual way that maybe you're not necessarily attuned to yet, but the more that you do it, the more that you attend, the more you start seeing that experience come alive for you. So, for example, where a man or a woman will come to a Torah class and they might not necessarily understand what's going on in the Torah class or know exactly what the teacher is saying, but they keep coming back. Why? Because they know deep down somewhere in their experience that this is uplifting me. Something about it carries me through my week. Something about it makes me feel more attuned to God, makes me feel more spiritual. It affects me, it impacts me. I think about it again throughout the week. I interact with my family from a different space on that day. What happened? How is that even possible, right? When I shake lulav and esrog, it doesn't necessarily happen that when I turn to my child, I have more patience, right? Or I'm just like more attuned to their needs. Why is it that Talmud Torah does that? Because it lifts us from our foundation. There's a saying that a sin can be extinguished. A sin can extinguish the light of a mitzvah, but nothing can extinguish the light of Torah. And this kind of speaks to what we're talking about here. A mitzvah it's one isolated experience. And again, we spoke about the advantage of a mitzvah, but it is one isolated experience. Yes, it's tzavta, which is connection, and we're connecting ourselves to God, and we're having Kabbalas Ol, and we're submitting our will to Hashem's will in that moment, which is tremendous, which is what Hashem wants from us. And at the same time, it's just that one experience, as opposed to the lifting that happens when you learn Torah. Which is why we're talking about Talmud Torah and how that helps you with your perspective of unity, just to go back to that idea. Something that we're trying to develop through learning Chassidus, through Tanya. What we're trying to come to is seeing the unity of God, seeing the world from Hashem's perspective. Torah helps you through the actual experience of learning Torah. You experience unity. Your entire body becomes involved in the experience of connecting your chachma with Hashem's chachma. It's not just my pinky or my thumb or my arm or my intention. It's my whole entire experience. There's a unified focus on Hashem's perspective, as opposed to the divisiveness or the split up experience of performing mitzvah after mitzvah after mitzvah. Yes, those are powerful moments, but learning Torah elevates the entire day, elevates your entire week, and elevates your entire experience. The word Anochi, right, is the first word of the 10 Commandments. Chassidus explains the word Anochi to be an acronym for the words Ana nafshi ksavis yahavis, which means I put myself into these words. Hashem is saying, when he says Anochi Hashem Elokecha, the word Anochi is an acronym for Ana nafshi ksavis yahavis. I'm putting me into the words of Torah. And the way to connect with me, the way to really see my perspective and see me like a true friend sees me, take on my perspective, is through learning Torah, investing yourself into these words. The Alter Rebbe gives a mashal, and he says that when you are hugging a friend, right, you're giving them a hug. What you're doing when you hug them is you're taking in their entire body. You're just like, it's a beer hug. Now, does it matter if they're wearing 1 layer or 2 layers or 17 layers? Not really. Right? You're still hugging them. You're still taking them in. The Alter Rebbe gives the example of hugging a king. Imagine the king is covered with a cloak and with these royal garments. If you have the opportunity to hug the king, you're hugging him. Even if there's a lot of different layers between you, and even if you've done a lot in your life that maybe you don't deserve to love the king, all those layers are nothing, because you're still achieving the same thing as if there was only 1 layer. You're still getting that hug. You're still bringing him entirely in, and your mind is subsumed with his chachma. There's an absolute connection there. There's a story about Rav Michal Zlatchever, who was a very famous chassid. When he was a very young child, he was this incredible mind, an Eloi. And he was basically just like sitting at home as a very young child, just polishing books, just eating them up. And a person either in their city or in a nearby city, a Maggid Shir, I forgot what his name was, maybe I wrote it down, here, Rav Chaim of Sanz, invited him to his keli. He spoke to Rav Michal's, at the time, Michal's father, and he said, I hear you have an Eloi of a son, a child prodigy. Come to my keli. We'll treat him like one of the boys, and we'll teach him and let him learn. Let him learn instead of learn at home. Let him learn with us. And so Rav Michal's father sent him and said, you know what, it's better for you to learn in a keli, go. So he goes, and he basically lasted about a week. And he came back to his father, and his father said, well, the shear wasn't deep enough for you. What happened? And Michal said, no, the shir was incredible. The person who was teaching was just as brilliant as you, was just as much of a Talmid Chacham as you are. But when he was teaching the shir, I didn't see fire come out of his mouth like I do when I hear from you. When I learn Torah from you, I see fire coming out of your mouth. Right? So obviously we're talking about someone who's tremendously spiritually attuned, and we're talking about a spiritual fire, a spiritual passion, something we probably can't even really attune ourselves to. But what happens? What he's describing and what he was able to see and what his father lives was the transformation that happens through learning Torah. The utter complete turnaround that overwhelms the body and takes over. There's a very interesting story about a man who was part of the beginnings of creating Israel. There was a lot of free thinkers, a lot of not from people who were creating the country of Israel and trying to formulate exactly what Israel was going to be about. And a lot of from people were very much against the state of Israel because it was based on the Zionist movement, and the Zionist movement was anti-religious. So a lot of religious people were not so excited about Zionism and everything that the Zionist movement represented. The Rebbe took a very different approach. The Lubavitcher Rebbe took a very different approach, and he actually started corresponding with these free thinkers. A lot of them were poets, a lot of them were intellectuals. They would publish their thoughts, and he wanted to connect with them. He felt like he could influence them. One of these people was a man, I don't remember his name. I forgot his name. He was a free thinker, very anti-religious, but he had a correspondence with the Rebbe. He appreciated the Rebbe. The Rebbe asked to read his books, and he said, I don't know if you want to really read my books. They're very much against everything you believe. The Rebbe read them, commented on them, sent him back feedback. So very much had a relationship with him. This was just one. There was another man who wanted to write an expose on Chassidim. And he actually wrote a few books with different chapters on different types of Chassidim. And when he came to Chabad Chassidim, he realized there's a lot here that I'm not understanding, because a lot of Chabad Chassidus is based on actual text. And he wasn't adept at learning this text. So he needed to learn the text in order to publish his expose. So he reached out to a rabbi in his community, someone who maybe he could learn with and learn more about Chabad Hasidus, and then write about Chabad Hasidus. And so this man wrote into the rabbi and asked him, should I do this? This person is anti-religious. What he's going to write is probably going to be anti-religious. Should I learn with him? The rabbi said, you should absolutely learn with him. However, do not ever tell him to do any sort of mitzvah or take on anything when it comes to religiosity, which is astounding, because as we all know, Chabad Chassidim are all about spreading Judaism and asking someone if they'll do another mitzvah, asking them if they could just bring a little bit more light into the world, right? So this, even in this story, you'll see the two perspectives. If you have a mitzvah, grab it. If it's coming at you, do it. We spoke about the Frierdiker Rebbe last time, where he said, we no longer know what our mission is. We no longer know the subtleties of the sparks of where we're supposed to elevate. So whatever's coming at you, do it. Elevate it. That's what we're supposed to be doing right now. That's one approach. Here, in this specific situation, the Rebbe took an entirely different approach. And he said, do not try to influence him. Just learn with him. Don't force him to do any mitzvahs. Don't invite him to do any mitzvahs. Don't challenge him to put on tefillin every day. Nothing. Just learn. And so this man started to learn with this rabbi, and they learned often. And over the 4 or 5 years that they learned, this man learned enough that he was able to write this expose on Chabad Chassidim. In the end, it ended up being 3 books because he was getting so invested. And at the end of 4 or 5 years, he asked this rabbi, he said, I don't understand you. From everything that I've learned, all the chassidus that I've learned, how come you have never asked me to do a mitzvah? Like, I know your perspective. You want me to do mitzvahs, but you haven't asked me. You've never questioned me. What is it? And so the Rav shared that the Rebbe asked me not to. He said specifically that I should not. And the man heard that and realized that, the Rebbe was giving him space. Now, the end of the story is, right, fairy tale ending, that this man, through learning Torah, through being refined, through experiencing the transformation of what happens when we engage with Hashem's Chachma, when we allow our body to elevate with Hashem's Chachma, what happened? He took on a little something here. He started putting on tefillin. He started keeping Shabbos, a little mitzvah here and there, until he was a full-fledged Frum Yid. But what was the perspective of the Rebbe? The Rebbe here in this situation said, let Torah transform. Let Torah speak for itself. Let it have its own influence. Let the Eibishter bring this person up and transform him from the bottom up. And that's what happened. So when we look at both perspectives, both of them are important. Both of them are obviously what we're supposed to be engaging with. Here, the Alter Rebbe is bringing to us this perspective because it's so important not to lose sight of Torah and the preciousness of Torah, and how engaging with that will bring you to a whole nother level. Sometimes when we're engaging in Avodas Hashem, we take on small, bite-sized, attainable goals, which is really important, right? We want to be able to take on a achlata or take on something powerful, take on a new mitzvah, and grow consistently and gradually, and always be growth-oriented. Another way to grow is to actually have a complete identity shift, right? So any self-help book you've ever read, the beginning of that self-help book has for sure a chapter on identity, right? What are you identifying with? Are you identifying with someone who doesn't exercise? Are you identifying with a non-creative? Are you identifying with an overeater? If you're identifying with that, then that's where you'll stay. That's what your identity is. Or you could identify with something new, something different. You can change from within, and suddenly it doesn't feel like you to not exercise because I'm identifying with someone who exercises, or a hiker, or I'm identifying with someone who has a clean mouth, let's say, or someone who speaks only of other people's greatness. When I start identifying with that, then there's suddenly a transformation. I've changed. This is who I am. It doesn't mean that I won't lapse every now and then, because yes, we're human, but what has happened is an inner transformation. So it wasn't like I have to not speak Lashon Hara from 6 to 7 every single day, and that hour at least I'm clean. That's beautiful. That's a mitzvah. That's one chunk of your day that is covered, and that's tremendous. And another perspective is that it doesn't have to be so hard sometimes. It doesn't have to be like you have to break yourself to get only, to climb this mountain and to take one step at a time. Here, the Alter Rebbe says there's also other opportunity available to you to transform through learning Torah, to just change your entire perspective, to bring that godly perspective into your reality just by engaging with the words of Torah, and how that transforms you and how that transforms your perspective. I'll share with you a small story. So someone recently approached me and she said that when she was in Shidduchim, and her children were in Shidduchim, she called my mother to ask for advice, because my mother married off her 4 kids. So she thought it was a good idea to ask her. And she was saying that my mother gave her some really good advice. So I was like, okay, great. What's this advice? I want to hear. And she said, your mother told me to say 7 prakim of Tehillim, certain prakim of Tehillim. I was thinking, first of all, where is that? Is there a source for that? Okay, beautiful, very nice. I love that. And with this Perek of Tanya, that honestly makes so much sense. How are 7 prakim of Tehillim going to help you find a shidduch for your child? What is it really going to do? Besides for beseeching to Hashem and davening to Hashem, which is very important to do always, not just if you're trying to find a shidduch for your child. What does happen when you're engaging with Tehillim? building into your day, engaging with Tanakh, what happens is that there's a transformation. I said my Tehillim, I connected with Hashem. Now I have a new layer of godly perspective in my reality. Now I'm armed with a little bit of a lifting. I've experienced my mikra. I've called out to Hashem, and my essence has touched Hashem's essence. And now I feel like I could step into a new reality. There's a new world available to me, new possibilities. So what's so transformative about that advice for her was, I mean, that's literally what she told me was transformative that my mother gave her. It wasn't good advice like make sure to call 5 shadchins and like keep in touch with them, send them coffees. It wasn't any of that. It wasn't any like practical advice. It was learn Torah, say the words of Tanakh, and that will transform you to have a godly perspective, open up possibility, and somehow will affect your real reality, which is a deep desire to marry off your children. That's tremendous. So to hearken back to the first 2 stories that we spoke about at the beginning of this class, which was the juxtaposition of Choni Amagal and Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, right? The 2 stories of Choni Amagal davening and Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai getting it just right. Here you could hear what the Rebbe is bringing, or what the Rebbe is implying, as a distinction between tefillah, let's say, and Torah. Tefillah, you're asking for what you want. And so you're engaging with specifics. You're asking for exactly this. And you're also engaging with Hashem having an entirely different reality and wanting to give you something else. And you want this and he wants that. So he's giving you this. And you're like, no, let's fine tune that. I want it a little bit different until you finally get it just right. Still beautiful, still engaging with God. Absolutely incredible. To dive into Hashem and to see your tefillahs answered. Beautiful. There's something different about studying Torah and getting the answers that you need from Torah. There's actually the stories of Chassidim or even other people coming to the Baal Shem Tov and asking the Baal Shem Tov a question, and he would just open up a chumash and the answer was right there. You know, should I marry so-and-so? And literally open it up, and the answer is, yeah, I see that you should marry so-and-so. And he obviously wasn't making it up. He saw within Torah, he saw the answers. He saw the truth. He saw what should happen. Why? Because Torah transforms you. It allows you to be elevated, to see Hashem's perspective, for you to connect with Hashem's will. And that's why when Shimon Bar Yochai taught Torah, it flowed. It happened exactly right. Because, again, this is an intimation, but when we engage with Torah study, it's a connection that elevates your entire being, instead of just elevating a part of myself. And so the Alter Rebbe finishes off Perek Lamed Ches, chapter 38, with saying that, yes, there's an advantage of physical la'asai. There's an advantage to every mitzvah. And yes, we should engage with every mitzvah. And don't forget the absolutely transformative power of learning Torah. And I'll put a little, drop in a little advertisement for Chayenu. But I don't know if everyone knows what the Chayenu is, but the Chayenu is a little, looks like a little magazine, little newspaper that's published weekly. And it has basically weekly learning, but with English. So it has the source, it has the Hebrew learning if you want to learn it inside the Hebrew source. And it also has the translation. It has lots of explanations. It has beautiful stories. It has Tanakh, it has Nach, it has Mishnayos, it has Gemara in weekly attainable segments. And I've recently started learning it every week. And it's interesting because I never thought I even had time to do chitas. So now I'm learning the entire Chayinu, and it has been so transformative. It uplifts my entire day just to engage with Hashem's perspective and to feel like in a deeply spiritual way, I'm taking ownership over my spiritual well-being. There's a part of me that craves Torah, that craves godliness. And there's a part of all of us that craves godliness because the Nefesh Elokis is yearning to connect to God, yearning for that perspective, yearning to bring that to the human physical parts of itself. And if we just listen, we'll hear its desire, and maybe learning a little bit of Torah once a week or daily will help us engage with that and experience the uplift that happens with learning Torah. So that's just like a practical takeaway. If anyone wants, there's an app for Chayenu, there's the physical Chayenu. They're lying all around, you'll start seeing them. But even that, there's so much out there online, so many podcasts, so many Torah classes, even listening to it while you're washing the dishes or whatever it is, uplifts that experience and brings your entire body and mind and heart and perspective and experience to an uplifted place, and influences your entire surroundings and influences the rest of your day. So this is the Alter Rebbe concluding the great advantage of learning Torah. God willing, next week we're going to embark on a separate journey in the Tanya. But so ends our discussion over the advantage of mitzvah versus Torah. Any questions? Yes.
I understood the part where you said that somebody could come and want to learn Torah, and even if they don't absorb or really like understand everything, they just being in the environment already the chatter, it really does. The part that I'm a little bit confused on how describing how we want to pay for their child school thing, and like she doesn't even know words to feeling nothing, and she says like the favorite food party or whatever she does, and she just meditates on time or says Shema, whatever it is. I guess I'm a little bit confused as to like how does that exactly like I'm not exactly sure what you're looking for.
Yeah. So it's a great question. So of course a person should be davening, right? Every day we should be davening for the chinuch of our children and for shidduchim and everything else. I don't know about you, but I know for myself that davening could be an isolated event. And yes, it could be throughout the day, right? So like I'm in the car and I'm davening that my kids are safe in school. And I open up my house and davening that my home is safe. I kiss the mezuzah, Hashem is taking care of me, protecting me. And that's beautiful, right? That's tremendous. What I was trying to bring with that story, again, just like an example, what I thought was so interesting about what this woman had shared was she felt that this was practical advice. This helped her in this struggle or in this challenge. How did that help her? It was not just davening, which Tehillim is, right? Is davening to Hashem, is supplications to Hashem. But what the deeper perspective is, what I'm hearing from this story is when we learn Torah, what it does is it transforms us and our perspective. So instead of it being an isolated event in the day, it has become, now I'm a different person. I connected with Hashem, my essence, his essence. Now I go about the day connected in a deeper sphere, in a closer way. His perspective has now become more of my perspective. I don't have to remind myself to keep on davening. It's now we are connected. We are experiencing his perspective. Does that make sense? Yeah. Yeah. Yes, 100%. That's why it's important to daven out loud, to study out loud, to say Tehillim out loud. The action is still really important. But what we're trying to explain here is that kind of like we're here for the example of being a good friend. So back to that example, right? So the example of you could be a good friend and say like, "Hey, how was your day?" to your friend, right? Exactly. So you're where they're at. Not that necessarily throughout your entire day you're thinking through their perspective because you're still your own person, right? But a little bit you've gained their perspective and then you don't lose it. Like it's still there. You have that closeness and you have that their perspective of how they view going to the doctor, right? So let's bring it back to this shidduchim example, right? So when I'm saying the Tehillim and I'm transforming myself, so now I have a more godly perspective of of my day, of the way I'm approaching my world. It's not an isolated event of davening, Hashem, please take care of this. And okay, I could do this and I go and conquer my world. I have Hashem's perspective, just like I have my friend's perspective of like how she sees the doctor. Now I have Hashem's perspective, how he sees the world and how he sees my world. And I could channel that more into my experience. Yeah? Yeah.
Even if we, but it doesn't matter, even if we just pray, you're saying that comes with it, people come with time.
Yeah. So let's talk about it this way. Maybe this will help you a little bit. When we dive in, what we're doing is we're working from the bottom up. We're saying, okay, this is where I'm at. I need you. I need your perspective, and I'm elevating myself, and I'm climbing rung by rung in my connection with Hashem, in my channeling His perspective into my reality, right? As opposed to when we learn Torah, just like the story with the Rebbe, right? Where he told this person, just study Torah. Don't do anything. Don't do a mitzvah. Don't travel rung by rung. And then just watch how it transforms. I'll give you another example. I personally saw this where there was a person that I knew and he wasn't Jewish. And my friend was dating him. And then he went through the Geras process. He became Jewish. Not just did he become Jewish, he became a chassid. And not to say that's more elevated, it just means that he's more careful, right? A chassid is someone who's more meticulous about what he does. And he really grew in his Yiddishkeit and Chassidishkeit to the point where it physically transformed him. So the next time I saw him, which was like 6 years later, they're already married. I saw him and I thought, I recognize this person, but this person looks so much more refined, so much more like there was a glow, like a spiritual glow coming from his face. There was literally a transformation, a physical transformation that happened for him. Had, yeah, right. I mean, like you could even imagine, let's say, for example, and this is kind of bringing in the unity versus the divisiveness concept back in. Imagine like I'm just thinking of like a cartoon where you have the same exact person and one person is like, let's say the cup half full, cup half empty. So it's like the cup half full and it's like the cup half empty, right? Same person, but there's something about like the glow, the possibility, the positivity that comes over the physical appearance. What is that? Here, there's the divisiveness. I don't have enough. All I see is struggle. All I see is challenge. All I see is, uh, you know, where God is not in my life, where I just see the struggle. As opposed to here, I see possibility. I see openness. I see God in my world. It enlightens my perspective, right? You could see that transformation. The Alter Rebbe is saying that the unity, right, with which we could see the world, seeing Achdus Hashem, make it a part of our reality and our experience, that happens through Talmud Torah, and it comes in through the back door. It's just transformative. It doesn't feel like a struggle, like taking on a new mitzvah, taking on a new achlata. It just refines you from within. Does that make sense? Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Great question. Yeah. Wow.
Living and breathing words of I think people like, I mean, there are people like, it's rare.
Right.
And I find myself like just questioning, you know, because a lot of times it comes from just being able to engage with like modern, contemporary thought, that's not Jewish, like after I don't mean to, but it just like seeps in, it's everywhere.
Yeah.
That work with non-Jewish kids and people, you know, so it's just, you know, there is that wonder, and I was like the nerd or the total perspective, but
Right.
for my husband, it's like so clear,
Right.
so like jealous of him that he gets so
Wow.
do that. This is like giving me a physical.
Yeah. I could connect too. Yeah. And that's like that's the whole concept behind the Sarah Schneer movement, right? Like all these young women weren't learning Torah. Yes, we're growing up in from mitzvah driven homes, right? So they were from, but there was something lacking, right? Perspective was lacking. And so Sarah Schneer, who was totally a visionary, realized that just because women are not going to sit in Kailo a whole day, they still need to learn Torah, right? You still need to experience Hashem's Chachma and feel the refining that happens through learning Torah, because our perspective shapes our reality, shapes who we are. And if our perspectives, and up here is a more liberal or secular perspective, even if we're still practicing Judaism, we're not experiencing the refining of coming to Hashem's perspective. We're acting that way, and yes, we're refining His world and we're doing good things, but there's the advantage of Talmud Torah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm. Yeah. So beautiful. Sounds good. I feel like I've heard of it before. I've never read it. Anyway, thank you all for being here. Such a pleasure. And we should meet again soon. It's not me. My Israel uploads it on their website, and then also on YouTube. I think actually on YouTube it goes straight on YouTube. The My Israel I checked last night website hasn't been updated so recently. But yeah, it's good. Sure. Thanks for coming. I have to look that up. Circle arrow.
Yeah, it's so great. If you meet people that are down with that, and wash your hands, and it's just scream out like the other. Yeah. I remember these days. And even if like I was love. I'm gonna get busier and busier, but mornings are, I think mornings are good for you too, right? More than Tuesday and Thursday. That's also better. Okay, so I kind of want to put on our calendar, should we, before I do, because what's gonna happen is I'm just like, I know I already have a massage, but you know, just text each other. Do you do WhatsApp? Yeah. WhatsApp. So yeah, text me off. Yeah, so Skype. Yeah. I have a picture of my sister. It's forever. Stages will keep going. She's a good student too. Does there people inside? Yeah, or both.